Begin by taking the E3D V6 extruder and remove the 30mm fan from the heatsink. Next, remove the 30mm fan from the mount using a screwdriver. Next, take a 30mm fan grill, place it over the fan like so, and replace the screws again like so. Next, take the extruder and we can remove the PTFE tubing and put it to one side for now. Unscrew the heatsink. Next, unscrew the throat and unscrew also the nozzle. We can put the heater block and the heatsink to one side, and next we will need to prepare the nozzle and the throat. What we'll need to do is essentially wrap several layers of PTFE tape around the thread of the nozzle and around the bottom half of the throat. We want to make sure we wrap this around as tightly as we can. And rip off any excess. Finally, use a knife to clear away the PTFE tape from the nozzle's opening. Until it looks like this. And we'll want to do the same again for the bottom of the throat. Again, we want to clear away any excess tape. And we can do so with a knife. Until we have a clear opening like so. Next, take the heater block and insert the nozzle. You want to insert the nozzle onto the side with the screw, like so. And you want to make sure that you are able to feel some resistance here. If not, if it goes in too easily, you may need to wrap more layers of PTFE tape around the thread of the nozzle. But right now this feels good, and I'm just going to use a pair of pliers to get it in about that much. I want to leave about 0.5 millimeters gap, just to make it slightly easier in case I later on need to remove the nozzle, you want to leave just 0.5 mm gap between the heater block and the nozzle. Next we'll take the throat, and with the side with the PTFE tape wrapped around it, insert it into the heater block like so. Again, you want there to be a decent amount of resistance here as well, and you want to thread this all the way down. It would be easier to thread this into the block if you first attach the heatsink onto it, and then once the heatsink can't go down any further, just tighten that down as far as it will go. And next we'll take a pair of pliers and hold the nozzle, and take another pair and hold the top of the heatsink and twist them in opposite directions to get them nice and tight. Don't want to over tighten this, as it may cause the throat to snap, but once you've got it nice and tight, you should be good. And that is the nozzle assembly, the extruder assembly complete. Finally, we can take the fan and clip it on like so. Next, we'll prepare the 3D printed extruder carriage. We'll do this by inserting an M3 nut into that slot there and that slot there. If they don't slot in immediately, you can heat the nuts up with a lighter. And once the nut is sufficiently heated, it should slide in to the slot fairly effortlessly, like so. And we'll do the same again for the other nut. You want to make sure that the hole of the nut and the hole on the 3D printed part are aligned as well. Next, we'll insert 2 M3 nylock nuts into the slots on the top of the extruder carriage. We want to make sure that the side of the nut with the nylon ring on it faces away from the entry hole. Again, we'll be heating up this nut with a lighter and sliding it in. We'll use a screwdriver to align the nut with the hole on the 3D printed part, like so. And we'll do the same again for the other nut on the other side. Again, you want to make sure that the side of the nut with the nylon ring is facing away from the entry hole on this side. Next, we'll heat an M4 nut and slide it into the slot on the bottom of the extruder carriage here. Again, we want to make sure that the hole of the nut is aligned with the hole on the side of the 3D printed extruder carriage. And that is the extruder carriage now prepped. Next, we'll install the extruder itself onto the extruder carriage. We'll slide it in through the bottom like so, fan facing the front. and we'll take a M3 by 30mm bolt and screw it in to that hole there, and we'll take another M3 by 20mm bolt, by 30mm bolt, and screw it into that hole there. When inserting these two screws, it is absolutely important to keep the extruder straight like so, with the cables coming out the right hand side. Finally, we can snap the 30mm fan back on. Next, we'll take the 50mm blower fan and line it up with its mounting holes on the 3D printed carriage like so. Take an M4 by 20mm bolt and thread it in like so. Next, take another M4 by 20mm bolt, push it in through the bottom hole of the 50mm fan and thread it through an M4 nut like so. And tighten it down with an Allen key. Finally, attach the fan shroud onto the bottom of the blower fan. It should just snap on in place like so. Next, take the proximity sensor and remove one of the nuts and washer from it, and insert that into the back of the extruder carriage like so, and fasten on the nut to hold it in place. It's better shown in the instruction manual, but what you want to aim for is to have the proximity sensor just 2mm above the bottom of the nozzle. It doesn't have to be accurate at this stage because we will be adjusting it later on before we start printing, but a good place to have it is about 1 or 2mm above the bottom of the nozzle. Next, from the 12mm braided cable sleeving, cut off 125cm. Use a lighter to melt the ends to prevent them from fraying out. Next, take the extruder assembly and unravel all of the cables like so. I recommend marking the fan cables with masking tape so that it's easy to differentiate between the 30mm fan and the 50mm fan. This will come in super handy for when you're wiring these up. The heater block and thermistor wires are pretty obvious, and the proximity sensor cable wires are also pretty obvious. Next, you'll need to take the braided cable sleeving and feed all of these cables through it. This step can be quite fiddly, so I do recommend taking your time. The best way to do this is to first get them all in, and then bunch up the sleeving like so, and slowly push the cables through. You can take time this, as it can take a while to get all the cables through. Once they've come out on the other end like so, we can just pull them through. Like so. Once done, it should look something like this. Next we'll be taking the 3D printed tool carriage and inserting two M3 nylock nuts into these two slots on the top here. We want the side with the nylon ring facing inwards on both sides of the tool carriage. And like before, we'll be heating up these nuts with a lighter and then sliding them in. Again, you want to make sure that the hole on the nut is aligned with the hole on the side of the tool carriage, like so. Next we'll be inserting another M3 nylock nut into the slot on the back of the tool carriage like so. This one seems as though I can push in without heating. Next we'll thread a M3 by 16mm bolt into that hole there like so. Don't have to push it, we don't have to thread this in all the way through. We will be adjusting this later on. And that is the tool carriage prep complete. Next we'll take the tool carriage assembly and slot it on over the bushings on the x-axis. And we'll then secure it in place around the bushings with 4 cable ties, like so. We don't want to fasten the cable ties on too tightly, as that may cause jamming. Want to make sure that the tool carriage can still run freely on the rods. Finally, snip away the excess from the cable ties. Next, take two M3 by 20mm bolts and push them in to these 2 holes here on the tool carriage. Take your extruder assembly and fasten it onto the tool carriage. Finally, take a cable tie and secure the cables onto the tool carriage.